You are watching Access LaPorte County, Channel 97. Coming up next is the February 22nd, 2023 special meeting of the Long Beach Building Commission. You can find more information for this meeting by visiting www.accesslaportecounty.org.
Call meeting to order, the special meeting of the Long Beach Building Commission. Meeting was intended to discuss beach access there. They had three simple items to the agenda and it's going up front. They're simple.
Eli, turn on your.
Sorry, Larry.
Thank you.
Sorry. Is it on now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So I wanted to add three quick items onto the agenda, which I sent out yesterday. The first is 3100 Lakeshore Drive. We had approved the permit based on them, the owners getting and the contractor getting a licensed plumber, filling out an electrical permit. There was some discussion about a statement from the owner, but that's really not under our purview. And it really wouldn't mean much to us, even if there was a statement made. I mean, simply it's the property is zoned the way it is zoned. And if the owner changes the use, I think that's what we were concerned about. So that permit, we did receive the notice that they are using a licensed plumber and they're filling out an electrical permit. So that one was okay. 2006 Somerset was another.
So right, I'm just trying to catch up. So right now, today would be approval date for 31?
Yes.
Thank you.
2006 Somerset, that was another permit that we approved, subject to a revised site plan that showed that the front steps on the Somerset side were behind the 30-foot front setback, and they supplied that drawing to us last week. So that's another permit that we did approve, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that we got the proper information. 2631 Oriole Trail is a deck extension, and we received all the information. It's a very simple permit. The only thing that would have been a concern was the lot coverage, and the lot coverage is 24.5%, which everybody got. So that we did not approve previously. So Chris, we have to have a voice or because John's roll call vote. So if anybody has any questions on that, if not, we entertain a motion to accept that. Someone to approve it.
I'll second.
Motion by Bob LeMay, second by Pete Bibo. I don't even have a roster. John Coker.
Yes.
Pete Bibo. Yes. Larry Wall. Yes. Bob LeMay.
Yes.
Ken.
Yes.
Joy.
Yes.
Joe.
Okay.
And Larry, just for honors, I was reminded that minutes need to reflect who was in person, who was via Zoom, and those roll call votes in the minutes.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Moving on to the main purpose of the meeting. Everybody should have, Pete has done a tremendous amount of homework and legwork, and Bob and Lou did pictures and took an inventory of all the stairs. So there's a lot of research and information that's come to us. Everybody got a copy of Pete's latest information, which was sent out on, I think, Monday. The purpose of our meeting today is to discuss what our enforcement action will be, what we are going to enforce. And Chris, I'm going to ask you for some advice if I misstep here, but what we're going to enforce, how we'll enforce it, And then everybody should have a copy of Pete's inventory, which is this multicolored spreadsheet that has the stair inventory that Bob and Lou did. And Pete, you may have gone to check some other ones, but is that in line with what everybody's understanding what we're doing here today is?
Larry, do you have a date that was sent out, that inventory was sent out?
What? 15.
15.
The original inventory?
The latest one.
Will you share, Pete's info?
Okay.
That's the last one I have.
Okay. The original stuff was sent on January 3rd.
Okay.
That's Pete's original work. And then his subsequent follow-up work was on the 15th. Are you looking for the inventory?
Yeah.
Maybe we should make copies. I think we should, does everybody need a copy of this?
I've got it.
You got it?
I've got it here.
Okay.
Need it?
Does anybody else need it?
Anybody else need it? I've got it.
Okay. All right, so then we should be in good shape then.
Yeah.
So is that in line with what everybody's thoughts are as what we're going to hear today? Okay. Pete, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you've really done more homework than anybody else. I mean, I visited the sites as well as Bob and Lou have, but I think your synopsis here that you would just send out this week, if we want to start and go through that. I mean, if you want me to, I certainly will, but.
Well, there's no secret to it. I mean, just taking from the very documents that we made to preparing the ordinance and things that subsequently showed up, in particular, the floodplain, what do we call them, the floodplain ordinance or the floodplain requirements, yes, participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. Baked into what I've just laid out here, and it's open for discussion and whatever. It boils down to determining what the structures are, how they can be, if they're legal, how they can be installed, and the three different types of locations that we have to consider installations for. So if anybody has any issues with any of that, I'll just cover the first part here under the structures to be adequately anchored. This primarily comes from the flood insurance program and other programs that talk about keeping an open floodway, making sure that stuff is not put in the floodway that will be washed away and end up on somebody else's property or state property or become a hazard. Ensuring that erosion or damage to other properties is avoided. That's in every document that we've seen. Does not create a threat to public safety. For example, the pictures that Larry sent out yesterday or today showing what happened in during the Halloween storm and after, where things crashed into the lake and ended up miles away, or in some cases embedded in the sand. Things that will not inhibit the normal public activities on the public trust land, and not to disturb the natural landforms of the public trust lands. So these are things that were basically extracted from our ordinance, which was compiled from several different government documents, and like the Corps of Engineers and DNR, Coastal Hazards Planning Guide. That's basically the background for how I think we should be considering the stairs. And when we get down to the particulars of inches and feet and materials, that's covered in the next section. So, and we've gone through that several times, but once again, that comes from ordinances that we have, one that's very clear now is in terms of what can be attached to a seawall. Locations of stairs on a revetment, and then also when there is no revetment, there are no stairs, I'm sorry, no seawall. How do we then allow them to be structured? I think the one area that's important is to, and I'll throw it back to Larry here, and then as you all know, there's always been a question about where the ordinary high water mark is. And although, and I'll just say that when you get to the flood insurance program, they have expanded the ordinary high water mark. And I'll let Larry talk to that. It's either 584 or 587, depending on the velocity zone that's there. So we have to say, if we're going to enforce these things, we have to say, in particular, when there is no stairs and there is no, I'm sorry, no revetment or seawall, what do we do when it's just a frontal dune and we want to protect that dune? So I'll let Larry talk about the 587, the 584 issue.
Okay, so the natural ordinary high water mark is what we've all been familiar with over the course of the last several years. The floodplain doesn't use a natural ordinary high water mark. The floodplain is based on a FEMA floodplain maps. So what happens is we have 2 or 3 different I'm going to try to pull them up here. 2 or 3 different map sections that govern our lakefront areas. And those areas are, the last 2 years ago, they reconfigured those. And those floodplain areas have a mark of 589, 591 is the highest. So what that means is that's a VE zone. That we were in an AE zone, now we're also considered a VE zone, which is a velocity zone. So what that means is that anything that is our normal, what was called an FPG or a floodplain grade, is 585 feet above sea level. There's a 2-foot buffer, which puts us at 587. So let's consider any floodplain area, whether it's on the lake or off into some of the inland areas. Anything that's built below 587 feet has to conform to national floodplain rules. Change that was made was and I'll see if I can bring this up here for you. They changed from the 585 to a higher area along the lakefront, and that's the 589 to 590. So what that means is anything built below 590 has to conform to floodplain regulations, in addition to Town of Long Beach regulations, DNR regulations, and Army Corps of Engineer regulations. So the most restrictive of all those regulations is the floodplain. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Okay. I'll pull some maps up, Peter, if you want to keep going.
Okay, just if everybody has a chance, take a look at item A. We're talking about the structures in general. And basically, if you go through the documents, in particular the floodplain document, they don't want any sort of temporary seasonal stairs, ramps, ladders, that sort of stuff. no wooden access structures. All structures to be adequately anchored to depth and material. And that is yet to be defined what that means. We'll leave that up to the engineer. Not allowed if there's an alternate means of beach access, such as an adjacent stop. That pretty much comes from our ordinance. Partially submerged seawall or one that is alternately covered and exposed. That's something I threw in there because we have several along the lakefront that show up and disappear, and various claims are made about whether this is the high water mark, or this is an accurate or active seawall to protect property. And a groin is not a seawall. So that's sort of just the basic things we have to consider when we're talking about attaching things to seawall, building into abutments, that sort of stuff.
And we discussed these ones.
Sure. In fact, before we start that, Ken, if you're on Zoom, or you can look at the screen up here, this is the FEMA floodplain map. And I'll start at the top right here. That zone B, which is velocity, that's an elevation of 591. So anything where this line is here, that's the, and I'll zoom up as far as I can. That is, this zone here is 589. And that encompasses, that cuts back in right along that line. It gets too pixelated when you try to zoom in so much. If you move down to the next screen or the next map, this area is 591.
Hey, look, excuse me, what stops are these at? Like,
Okay. Let's see if I can tell you whose house this is.
I mean, just in general?
They don't unfortunately provide addresses. I have to look and know the house.
That's like 29, that right turn. Curves in and the water goes up.
Yeah, that's 29. This is the middle of stop 29 right here. I'm trying to find the road for you so you can tell which is which. But this is along stop 29. The bulk of the map that you're looking at here is along stop 29. That's a 591 zone. The eastern end of that map is 589. Make sense? Okay, Ken?
Yeah, to items in a nation, I guess it's 4. Not allowing if there is an alternate means of beach access such as an adjacent stop. Is this, I didn't see that in the ordinance. Is this something that is going to be proposed or contemplated? Because I want to discuss that. If it's not in the ordinance, or if it is in the ordinance, I'd like to discuss it to see if we could withdraw that. The point being is that, well, let's say, is that any property owner on the lake that is adjacent to a spot, and maybe 2 per spot, they have to use the adjacent spot, they access the beach. And despite the fact that they can build a stair and install on their own property that is in compliance with the building standards, so to speak, will be forced to use the adjacent spot. There, is that the intent?
Well, just to qualify that a little bit, and I'll let Bob speak to what's in the ordinance, but the idea, in general, if somebody builds the stairs on their own property above 589, that's their business. We don't have any control.
Yeah, understood. So they the adjacent stop owner,
Would not apply in that situation.
I think it would, I'll use the term legally, but, in compliance, build a stair on their property. They won't be prohibited from building that stair because they're adjacent to a public stair right next.
Well, if they're above, the 589, yes.
Well, it was saying anybody, in compliance. If they're in compliance with all building.
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah,
What, and I'm sorry, what document are you looking at? It's what I said yesterday, Chris, to everybody. And I'll send to you because I forgot to include.
and those are just summaries of what I interpret to be, things that were addressed in our ordinance or floodplain ordinance. And if it's not there, then I'm all for taking it away.
We have to, if somebody wants to build something and you can use something outside our stairs, since that's that's touchy topic, obviously today. And it's happened here at these meetings before. A neighbor proposes something and they want to build something. And two neighbors come before us and say, well, we don't like that. We cannot deny a permit if everything is done according to our rules and according to the state rules and federal rules. We can't deny a permit to build. And I think that's the answer. Does that answer your question, Ken?
It's not, there's bullet points.
Yeah, I think just to Ken's point, there's nothing that says that anywhere. And
If somebody's doing stuff legally, they can do it.
yes, one thing that I want to add to this discussion and something that has come about from the town's perspective, since you started this review process, is this FEMA ordinance and the requirements. Because they may trump everything, right? I will say that whatever your decisions are today, that I think that we need to, and the person that was spearheading this for the state, from the DNR, and Larry and I were working with, I think they were going to need some input, because this may be another place where you're headed, that we say, hey, we're trying to enforce, and this ordinance is basically dictated by FEMA to allow the town residents to qualify and be able to get flood insurance, right? But it's one of those, how are they going to handle it? And so you send out correspondence, because originally we had these, hey, did you have a permit? Is that legal at all? Some of these stairs may have been there for years, but they're out of compliance with FEMA. And this discussion is saying, well, grandfathering doesn't apply. As I said here today, I don't know that to be true, but we've experienced before what the DNR does, right? They decided they use their own ordinary high water mark. They weren't enforcing, and then it puts this building commission in the town in a bad spot. And so this FEMA throws a curveball at it, because it may trump everything. It may trump whatever you do with the shoreline protection ordinance, with the sea walls, all of those things. It's a pretty significant.
And it's important to know, as Chris is saying, we just passed that to comply with FEMA's requirements by November, whatever, the town had to pass, September, I'm sorry, the town had to pass to modify their ordinance to meet the new floodplain requirements from FEMA. And those requirements changed specifically what once was allowed, which were stairs, accessed, are no longer allowed in the floodplain ordinance. And that was a pretty significant change for us. Maybe not nationwide, but for us it is. Joe?
If there's two different ordinances between these different organizations, does it work that the one that's most restrictive we could use, or does it work that FEMA, just because they're FEMA, would overrule everything? How does that work?
Well, we have to abide by the rules of FEMA it's a stepping stone. I mean, maybe you want to speak.
Well, generally,
Starts
in interpretation of law, you can make things more restrictive. So the town, the state, let's just use the simple measure, because towns, municipalities tend to do that. The state may have their mandates on something. You can always make them stricter. You cannot make them less strict, right? Or, so that part of it,
So that's my question. If we make something stricter than FEMA, then we can apply, in other words,
yes, as long as you're in compliance. FEMA is overall we have to make sure that we comply. You have lots of spinning plates here, right? Because we have to make sure, but as long as it complies with FEMA, there are some things that may be strict, more strict than FEMA's requirements.
My understanding is, it always has been since I started doing this for the town, and not just on lakefront stuff and floodplain issues. We have the big umbrella is in everything is the federal government, then it comes to the state, then it comes to us, as Chris said, about the restricted things. We know that the sprinkler ordinance, but that happened to be a state thing, and then it also is encompassing it almost in the federal guidance. The information that's on the screen, that comes from the federal government. If we were to go in and say, this is discussion, I'm not saying that this is the rule, but I think that it would be foolish or not good for us to go in and say, we want to be more restrictive than the 591 or the 589. I think that we would be opening ourselves up for problems. Is that, well, I think
You already have some provisions that are more strict than that I don't think take you out of compliance with FEMA. I think the overriding consideration, and maybe we're making this too difficult for the purposes of your discussion. You're determined, maybe all of these didn't have permits and they weren't legal, then you need to determine how long they're there. And then also cite, there, we have these considerations at the federal level, the state level. Some of those, some of the concerns are the topic of discussions at the state level right now, right? With seawalls and those kinds of things. But FEMA, that isn't going away. That may, regardless, let's say that some court found a challenge that the town's ordinances aren't valid, or the state changes the law that it validates. FEMA is there, and that isn't going away.
right. And FEMA right now is these maps are the most restrictive. It's more restrictive than the town of Long Beach ordinance. It's more restrictive than the DNR. The way the DNR looks at it, I don't know what you'd call that ordinance, and it's more restrictive. Well, I shouldn't say it's more restrictive. It is the restriction of the Army Corps of Engineers. So what we're looking at, the 591, 589, that is the most restrictive. Long Beach is not as restrictive as that, nor is the DNR. Make sense?
So Larry, do our 42-inch wide parallel metal stairs that are anchored comply with the FEMA regulations?
Yes.
Okay.
They would comply with the new floodplain ordinance. But I think that's what Pete was gonna get to next.
I have a question on this adjacent properties here. I'm hearing that this may or may not be legal.
It's your mic, Lou.
That is, I'm hearing that differing opinions here on whether this would be legal or not, or we're going to implement it into our ordinance. To what would be the definition of adjacent? How many blocks away from the stop would be included?
This is a discussion point. This isn't any legal document. This is just what Pete's suggested that we consider today. I don't think we're talking about changing an ordinance. We're not talking about changing any rule. This is just a discussion point. So I don't, anybody, and Pete, I hope you take this the way I'm saying it. If this isn't our rule, this is what, after a lot of research, Pete's suggesting we consider today during our discussion.
Thank you.
Actually, I thought it was in our ordinance, and I could be mistaken.
Yeah, no, it's,
I don't think
yeah, it's not in the ordinance and, you know, as much as I'm in sympathy with what Pete's expressed here, we can't really make up ordinances as we go along here, so.
Yeah,
I
it's,
agree.
it's,
I think you just strike this from even discussion.
Yeah, yeah. And Lou, you asked the question that I was gonna raise, how many houses each way is considered? You know, so you get into it,
Consider Joe's thing, and I think maybe we just take this.
yeah, take it out.
Next.
And then, moving on to the item under that, partially submerged seawall or one that can alternately covered and exposed is not allowable location for a stair. Okay, understood. However, what are the thoughts on if this former seawall becomes exposed? And let's say it's in excess of 2 or 3 feet, maybe 4 or 5 feet, it protrudes. And how do you get around that or over it to get down? And it's in the in compliance.
If it would be, if once that seawall becomes exposed and they wanted to put stairs in and were compliant with our ordinances, they'd be able to do that.
Okay, so that point, if we incorporate that, should stipulate that it would have to be in compliance with the current high water marks and so forth. Okay,
well, I'm not really sure, going, but back to that, that isn't in the code, right? That's a discussion point, and so I don't want anybody to get lost in, you know, the ordinances only get changed by the plan commission initiating it or the town council. So these points, to me, shouldn't even be part of the discussion unless you're proposing some changes to the council and or APC. Otherwise, they're gonna blur what you're doing.
I'm not, certainly not prepared to do that. And again, this is informational stuff that Pete did a lot of research on. And therefore, our discussion today before we get to the inventory. So we can't change the ordinance. So I think it's important is if everybody can, and Pete and Lou and just discussed and Chris, that, you know, that's not really up for discussion. And I hate to reiterate it, but if somebody wants to build something and it's according to our rules, we can't stop. There's no reason why we would stop that.
so in other words, Larry, to that issue, if the seawall, an old seawall does become exposed and it's within the guidelines and the homeowner wishes to build not a seawall, a stair, becomes necessary to build a stair, they can do so provided all the criteria is met.
Yes,
That's the understanding of this.
yes.
Okay, no problem.
Groyne is not a seawall. Does everybody know what a Groyne is? They're not allowed anyway, but it's basically a giant tube that's filled with sand or concrete. Pete, you want to keep rolling?
No, I think we should.
Okay.
I mean, the issue becomes, if everybody wants to discuss, you know, 3 different categories. Whether it's located on the seawall, on the resident, or where it is. Because those are the three types of things that are that we've addressed as potential issues with the pictures that we're taking. So if we have any issues there, we need to resolve that.
Does everybody understand what Pete's notes here? That these are part of the ordinance, that they're 42 inches wide. They must be parallel to the seawall, made of iron or suitable sturdy metal. I think the stone is not too loud. Welded or permanently attached to structure.
Self-explanatory.
Right, revetment, Stairs may not extend beyond foot of the existing revetment and at a point higher than or equal to 587. Funnel dune or shelf may not start below 587, parallel sections above, and do not destroy the frontal trim. Okay, you want to move on to the inventory? Okay.
Question here about the revetment scenarios. You know, there's multiple routes there, cascade down, perpendicular to the water over the small revetments. And if it's a 587, a drop to the sand, it could be, 6-7 feet. The stairs don't come to the beach. You know what I mean?
I guess, I'm not sure what your question is, but I think what your question is, if somebody's below 587,
Yeah.
that whatever's built has to conform not only to our ordinance, it has to conform to the floodplain ordinance, which is same type of thing. It has to be fully anchored, isn't floatable, those types of things. And that's true for not only stairs, but any structure. Does that answer what you were?
No, I'm assuming that the beach is 581 and the stairs are only 587, and it's 6-foot drop.
They can build below 587, but they have to conform to the floodplain ordinance over and above our, as Pete had mentioned earlier. If somebody's building above 587, they can do whatever they, as long as it conforms to the town of Long Beach zoning and normal codes. If they build below 587, then the floodplain also takes precedent there. So it's not a no, you can't, but now you have to consider. Right, you're stepping up the enforcement stair all the way up to the federal, to the FEMA. Above the 587.
Follow up with those points so that if the foot revetment is below 587, there are stairs at that point. 587 up to 587 has to satisfy our requirements, so it could be.
Right, sure.
Everybody agree with that?
Yes.
I have a general question. How is the elevation determined on the shore? Are there benchmarks along the way? Do they use it as cover? Which
The easiest way to do it is you can actually call the Coast Guard. You can do it online, or you can call the Coast Guard and they'll tell you what the lake level is that day. Whatever it is, 577. And then you could take from that. I can do it with one of my guys in 10 minutes. You set up an instrument on the beach, you take the elevation. I mean, a surveyor has to determine it for our purposes. But in general terms, the lake level is X for that day. And then you can take an instrument, and as you know, being in the construction business, you can set any marker. Sure. But the town does not have any benchmarks along the lake that says this is what this elevation is. A lot of surveyors, or not a lot of, all the surveyors have general marks, but they're good these days is set so that they're telling you what I mean, you can go on Google, you can see what the lake level is. I don't know how accurate that is. Does that answer your question?
yeah, pretty much so.
Or did you treat Yeah, I didn't realize that. Pete said the Corps of Engineers has a site to tell you the lake level data. Okay, so I guess that I'm thinking the next step is to move into the inventory and decide what we need to enforce. I shouldn't say what we need to enforce. Everybody, is everybody on the same page as far as what we need to enforce?
We need to enforce the FEMA regulations first, because if we don't, we lose the ability for our homeowners to buy flood insurance.
Right.
And then secondly, we need to enforce our own ordinance.
I have a question for you, Larry, is sorting through this.
because you guys are gonna make your determinations, but I still think there's some answers that need to be resolved before any action. You certainly give people notice of why you think they are. One question I have is the previous, since you're most familiar with the previous ordinance that just basically got restated with the updated FEMA requirements. Any of those requirements same or similar with regard to things being anchored down and not being, do you know if they're new or not offhand? If not, that's verifiable.
They're not exceptional. I don't know if exceptional is the right term. There's not a big change in what needs to be done. Anchorage is pretty much what our ordinance says.
Not now, previous.
Oh, previously, the previous floodplain allowed stairs
That's
in the floodplain.
okay. That's what I'm checking, because there is this rub of when did the new ordinance take effect? Is there grandfathering deed? What is the state going to do in terms of, so if it would support, this new one, because one of the, I'm not making anybody's points for them, is, is there indeed grandfathering, or this doesn't matter, and FEMA's saying, hey, you gotta, well, let's say that there was a seawall there. Then those have to be ripped down and play devil's advocate here. So that's why I wanted to see how that language, I don't know offhand. It's easily ascertainable because we can find out what the old ordinance was. So
The old times, did have the one sentencing that would allow stairs or something like that. But in several other places, it said that they had everything had to be anchored. They didn't want anything to be out of wood. They didn't want, they had all the other.
So those things still apply, so that part of it is either way, what their determinations are going to be then, are they in violation of the town code, or are they didn't get a permit? That seems to be a big one for me. So, all right, thanks. Just one more thing, back to the discussion purposes. Are we saying that the stairs cannot be temporary at all? Right? They can't be removable? Right. I mean, people have stairs that are, on hinges and stuff, and they pull up and take them off.
And I don't know exactly where you were going, Lou, but there are stairs that we have permitted that conform to our ordinance that people will pull up. And I know of two sets right off the top of my head. So those people had the stairs fabricated. They are made out of metal. One is steel and one is aluminum. And they remove those stairs at the end of the year. And the reason they remove them, they comply with our ordinance. But the reason they remove them is because they don't want them to be damaged by the winter storms and the shorelines. Is that? Okay, yeah. We will do that. But if they're below 587 or the 591, no. Yeah. So our ordinance, I think, allows them, doesn't it? If you put in removable steel stairs.
You can pull them up and put them on your property, on the seawall.
Right.
We certainly haven't got down on anybody from doing that.
But it requires the stairs to be parallel.
Yes.
Well, that's what our ordinance says, yeah.
Right.
And some of the stairs that are removable are not.
Right.
I can think of one had stopped 23, just to the right of 23, Casada something or other. And they've got big wooden, real heavy stairs that they actually pull up onto their property. We haven't come down on them. They're frankly not in compliance with our ordinance.
Well, again, before we get into the inventory, if somebody has a set of stairs that they put down, they're on a weekend and they run those stairs down over their seawall to get to the beach, are we going to allow that?
We haven't come down on it. I don't think our ordinance specifically allows it, however.
Okay. I think that was, and Chris, I want to make sure that everybody understands. So this grandfather situation, what are we supposed to do? I mean, So are we supposed to, because if somebody had stairs in there 10 years ago, 5 years ago, before, when did our ordinance go in by?
The stairs,
2018. Yeah, it's haven't been there for a while.
I mean, so
it's been restated a few times, that was original.
I don't see a date on this.
I have the ordinance, but I don't have, it doesn't say the date, 154/207.
I have a question just for clarity. Are we allowing grandfathering or not allowing grandfathering?
And that's the question for right now, because there's no sense in going through the inventory if we don't know what we're talking about.
Exactly.
What do you say we do this? Why don't we assume right now there's no grandfathering, because I don't think FEMA's gonna have grandfathering. When we're done with this, Chris, you can check and confirm that that's the case. Does that sound like a reasonable way to proceed?
Yes, because I do think there's going to be grandfathering. I think that you should make your determinations of those that you believe to be in violation. And then you don't have to take any action. You're going to have another meeting, right? And you can, before that time, you make your determinations of the ones that you believe to be illegal. And state, but again, the simplest one is there's no permit. They shouldn't have them, right? They're out of line with the code. They're wooden. We believe it's out of line with FEMA requirements. And by then we can discuss, because as I understand it, you're also going to give each of them, when you give the go to send notice to each of them, give them a period of time to then respond to you to have a discussion, right? It isn't you coming in saying, hey, we're tearing these out. Let's have it. These are the basis why we believe they're illegal. You could also decide, hey, we're going to just send an enforcement letter of, you get to decide that. We believe these are illegal and we're going to take this enforcement action unless you bring them into compliance. I'm still, yeah.
Larry? Joe, I just have a suggestion. It's up to you guys, but I'm looking at this list and there's quite a few that say over. I would think the over means it's on a seawall. And maybe if we stayed with a certain topic, if we went through all the overs first, we'd stay at the same mindset. What makes overs legal or not legal? And then we go to a different topic, or we can jump around. That was just a suggestion. Okay. I think that's a good point, Joe. And I also, as Chris has said, why don't we look at these, that there is no grandfathering, set the enforcement or set the action determined by each one, set the action. And then as Joe suggested, we can go through and why is this action necessary? Does everybody think that's good?
Well, and when you look at the list, only one had a permit. So, you know.
Larry?
Yeah.
Could I clarify a question? I just want to clear my own mind. If you have some stairs that are grandfathered, let's say, been there for 10 years, but they're wooden, but they're on their own property, are we saying that's going to be okay? Because I thought the idea was to get rid of these wooden stairs because they perform a hazard when you have the high water.
Yes, John, that's what I think we kind of just determined. Any stair that is wood.
You got to go.
Right.
Grandfather doesn't apply.
Grandfather doesn't apply. That's what we're saying. If it's made out of wood, it's against our ordinances. It's against the floodplain ordinances, FEMA ordinances. So it's got to go.
Even if it's on their own property.
If it doesn't conform to the ordinance, right. If it's below that 580 or 589 or whatever that happens to be in the map zone, it doesn't matter because now it's in the floodplain and has to conform to our ordinances.
Well, if we're going to assume there's no grandfathering, then none of these can compliance.
Right.
None of them.
They've done that purpose.
Okay.
For many reasons, doesn't matter, permanent, only one is parallel.
Oh, wait. Let's start at the top and go down.
Joy's point was, Pete, that if there's no grandfathering, then none of these stairs comply.
Well, yes, basically that's what people said. I mean, I don't know. I would say that if we had some concern about something was obviously, you know, pain in the butt to remove, or I don't know what, we should consult him. Instead of, we can give a variance. Well, now they're losing the guiding post. And well, we got together. Okay, right. But they're the ones who, you know, it's modeled after what FEMA said. They're basically saying, A, they don't want anything that can cause, as I said, a hazard, something that would cause interference with normal activities, distribute trash along the beach, inhibit the floodway. They want the beach clear, so if we have a problem, we don't solve it. It has to do with this grandfather stuff. I suggest we put a FEMA to. We get a variance. Still, will this fit here in your body?
That's exactly the point I was making, is there may need to be some feedback so that even if you make these decisions, to be honest, I do think it's important to give each of the homeowners, and you promised that long ago when you had your first meeting, the opportunity to show you why, but if there's a variance that's needed, I believe that the onus will be on them to contact FEMA, and we can give them contact, and in between that.
It's even better, but then.
But I think that's what you communicated. We found that you didn't have a permit, that you're out of compliance with our shoreline protection law, stair ordinance, you're out of compliance with FEMA, and you need to contact us, you know, show us, otherwise go from there, decide what your enforcement mechanism.
So, okay, two, Larry, kind of, Joe. I think Joy mentioned it and everybody else is noticing it. If you look at just two categories, permit is one category, material is the other category. As Joy said, there's only one person that had a permit. So if we're going to go by permits, all of them are no's. And then if you look at the material, the majority of them is wood. So those people would get a no.
And just for clarification, if you're using that as your basis, because I do not think the result will be that there won't be grandfather. That may be a variance, there may be something in writing. However, is your basis to say, so for instance, the town's shoreline protection ordinance and the restrictions on stairs, if they've been there for 10 years, you're not trumping that with that ordinance. If you're saying it's based on FEMA, because I believe they would be grandfathered and they've been treated as such. And there's some other enforcement issues if they've been there for 10 plus years. And I don't know how people are going to prove them. You know, there were a few that we did early on that you gave letters to that were approved grandfathered so they could report it. So Joe, going back to your question.
There were steel stairs.
I understand that, but what I want to do is make clear what your basis of saying that would if FEMA wasn't part of our conversation, are you still arguing or making the point that wood stairs aren't allowed? Because I don't.
Well, if we're going to allow wood stairs, and we have another big storm, and Larry showed all those pictures of all the damage, and the danger, and the nails, and the shreds, and everything else, then what are we doing? We're not accomplishing anything. We're still going to have dangerous situations on the beach. I thought that was the whole idea, is to make it a little safer.
I don't disagree that that's what you're generally doing, but there may be some that have been maintained. Let's use seawalls as an example. There may be some shoddily constructed seawalls over the years. Are those going to be torn out because they're not in compliance with your code restrictions now? So I just think you have to be careful on what your basic, if you're hanging your hat on FEMA, and you want them to have to get a variance, that's different. If I don't believe that the current code says nothing has been retroactive. So something that has been there 10 years and existing, and they're not in disrepair and they've been allowed to be there, I do not think that your regular code, just because you pass a restriction that says no more wood stairs, that they're disallowed.
Then I'll take the other argument, then we're going to be allowing a dangerous condition, potential dangerous condition to continue. And I don't think that's right.
I think what we should probably do here is, or I'm gonna make a suggestion as to what we can take the next step. Can I ask Pete?
Can I ask one more?
Yeah, go ahead.
And we're jumping around, but I mean, Pete did, like we said, he did the work. The first, if we call it a sentence, whatever you want to call it, the first thing it says that if you don't go with the compliance, then you won't have flood insurance for the town. I thought that's what that says. That if you don't honor grandfathering is not valid. If you don't honor that and you let them have it, I'm assuming, and I'm looking for interpretation, then the flood insurance program will not apply to the town if we don't abide by no grandfather. Is that what that sentence says?
Yes.
And is that correct? I mean, if it's not made up out of the sky, it's a comment, it's based on fact. Why would, there's where it says grandfather, it says it right there, clear. Where am I wrong?
Well, you're potentially wrong, and I can't give you what you're hanging your hat on is Pete's words are what the law is.
Yeah, exactly. I'm basing on.
There's no ordinance that says grandfathering is not allowed.
I'm not looking for an ordinance.
I understand.
Let's not mix the water. All I'm saying is there's a statement here that says if we don't abide by fathering, that, or if we, whatever word I'm trying to say, you know what I'm trying to say, that we cannot have flood insurance program. That's what this sentence says. And you're saying you don't know if that's true? I mean, so that's my question. So you're not accepting that as fact?
I am not.
Okay.
That would not be my recommendation to you, but I think that you could make the finding and communicate that you're not in compliance with FEMA, either the way that the ordinance existed previous and or with the recent adoption, and then have that discussion with them and also get some more direction from FEMA. Again, let's assume something built along the shoreline. I do not believe that FEMA is going to come in and just start. The DNR told us before, we're not sending helicopters and boats in and monitoring, and this caused a lot of issues. So getting some direction from FEMA is going to be important on this, because you make these determinations and FEMA allows or says, hey, they are grandfathered. It makes it difficult. Here again, there's no specificity for you, and here locally you're forced with making these decisions that you might not have support from.
How hard is it to get somebody to clarify it? I mean,
Well, how about we go back to my original conversation of Larry, and then we'll reach out to the person that we had to work with to implement and report to once the ordinance. So I still think that you can make your determinations, even if it's as simple as saying you're not in compliance with FEMA, which is required, and we get some further direction and input and feedback from the local administrators.
Just to be clear, FEMA gave us the ordinances, and they said, if you don't pass these ordinances as written, no changes, you will not qualify for the flood insurance program. And that was done twice. Once under when I was there, and once last week. And when I say grandfathering, it is not an issue, but I mean that there is no statement in the ordinance that says stuff that was there before such and such can be trash, it can be wood. It says follow the rules that are in this ordinance. That's what we pulled. Now, as to the stairs inventory, there's two things there. The permit column really is permit to Long Beach. We want to say because you don't have a permit, it's no good. That's one thing, but that doesn't apply to FEMA. FEMA is don't put stuff in there that's going to break away. That's it in short. So there's a little bit of difference in how this can be addressed. But if it's a wood stairway and it's below the 587.9, whatever it is, that is not compliant with what the ordinance, the FEMA ordinance says, period. So, because I think some of this will be clarified as we go through a grain of these, and you'll see. And let's make a determination.
Okay, I think the best way to look at this is going to be, let's look at the inventory in its entirety and under Pete's columns here. So, and we'll just start, and we'll start, for lack of anything different, we're just gonna go, sorry, that's a drug alarm. That means I'm supposed to be taking something. Let's look at, I mean, the odor, the photo, the address, that doesn't really make any difference. The first column is permit. So, and again, we're gonna look at these as if there is no grandfathering, and I think that's the correct way to do it. And then if we find through some research after the fact that FEMA is gonna say, yes, we will allow this particular one or that one or grandfathering, then we can change it. But I think this will be this pretty simple way. So if we're gonna say by a Long Beach permit, they're in violation, everyone is in violation in the first column of permits except for 2501. If you look at the pictometry and what that is, Pete has showed me how to do this and has done it. When you look at it, you can go on to Beacon and you can pull up a property, and then you could look at the history. Some of it goes back, I think, to 2002 or 2005. So when somebody comes in and says, well, my stairs have been there since X day, it's very simple. We say, okay, can you give us some proof that they've been there? They would have to let us know. So what these no's, the greens that say yes, those were there as of the March 20 date. The red ones were not there. So that would say that anything in red would be against our rules. The material, that's another very simple way to look at it. Anything that says wood, which Pete has already gone through and done everything, there are 2114 is metal, 2206 is metal, 2216 is metal, 2226 is metal, and 2956 is metal. So that's only 5 staircases out of, I don't know how many we have here that meet the requirement. Then you look at the seawall, over behind that, I would rely on Bob to say, does that meet the ordinance? But I think we've got enough qualifiers here to make some decisions for inclusions today. The ordinary high water mark, basically that's the DNR. And what that means is we're not really up for discussion where that is, but the DNR says 584 right now. So if what Pete says here is, and I'm not trying to speak for Pete, is anything in the green is above the 584. So everything else doesn't meet the DNR requirements. And if it doesn't meet the DNR requirements, it certainly doesn't meet our requirements. The next is the floodplain at 587. Every one of those staircases is below 587. So to everybody's point, as we've been discussing here, there are 1, 2, 3 columns that basically reject every one of these staircases. So, and I think what that's saying to us is every one of these is in violation. What is our first level of enforcement? If we want to look at the FEMA situation,
As I see this one be like a staircase that is metal attached to a seawall firmly should satisfy, even if it's below the 587, should be good. Unless we want to stop it because there's no permit or it was not grandfathered. But as far as the physical characteristics of it, the placement of it, that's fine. So, not just because I say it's below the 587.
You're right, Pete, I'm sorry, that was a mistake. So I guess if you couple the FEMA column with the yellow heading, and you couple that with the material column,
Yeah.
then we've got 5 that could meet our ordinance. Then I guess the next thing would be is to look if those 5 are parallel, and none of them are. So there's only one staircase on here that meets the Long Beach ordinance of being parallel. I hope I'm making sense here as I'm discussing.
It's made out of wood though. So that doesn't qualify either.
So,
We're back to square one.
well, I don't know that we're back to square one. Every staircase on here
Is not compliant.
is not compliant.
Does everybody have the pictures that were sent out, the physical pictures, the JPEG? You got those accessible? Can you call up 1950?
But you know, the problem is that this is a new computer since those were done. Those were sent out. When did you and Bob, did you decide that? Oh, man. You know what, if you guys want to have some discussion, I'll see if I can find, I don't know if I can get them in here. I'll certainly try.
I mean, the best way to resolve most of these is just by looking at the physical staircase itself. And I'd say half of them are very, very easy decisions on any plane or floodplain. Yeah, there was some. I mean, looking at the individual clears up. It was quickly, I look at it. We still have that, we still have computers on here that projects.
I think the town bought one, but I don't think anybody ever figured out how to use it. And now it's old technology. So Chris, we really think that FEMA would change the rule and say, okay, this is the new rule, it's more strict, we don't want anybody to get hurt. But if it's really old and falling apart, we're gonna grandfather it? I mean, that doesn't make sense, does it?
I don't think they're gonna change any rules for you. The issue is whether they're gonna enforce, much, again, like the DNR did. Old and falling apart is a different conversation than, like Mr. Coker's example of something that's been there for 10 years. And it's not in disrepair and it gets used and it's been allowed to be there. So FEMA's not changing anything. The issue is whether you're, once again, stuck in the middle of, here's these grandiose ordinances that we're requiring you to pass. And somebody comes to us and we're going to give them an exception because we're not going to come enforce that.
Right, but FEMA typically doesn't enforce these things. They make the municipality enforce it or you lose your flood.
Well, I understand that, but whether they're going to give you an exception and they want you to mandate, all right, then we shouldn't have had any of these structures at all over these years. And you shouldn't have been eligible for flood insurance for the last 20 years, for instance. I think that you should make your determinations on what you think are the issues for not just one-stop shopping, right? You're not in compliance because you didn't have a permit. You're not in compliance because you didn't comply with our shore protection stair ordinance. You're not in compliance because you're you're not in line with the requirements of FEMA. Those are the determinations that I think you should make.
Larry, quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you define for me grandiose?
Define what?
I'm just using
Big, really big, really big.
What did I say? Some pictures, but Let's see if I can do this. Just open them up and try to bring them up as I can. I can see you. Yeah. This is what you guys need.
Is there anything that keeps us from saying, okay, to everybody that lives on the lakefront, okay, to be in compliance with the FEMA rules and so that we can get insurance? This is what your stairs have to be, and you've got 6 months to comply. Is that something like that possible?
6 months sounds like a long time to me, especially in summer.
Okay, I just.
I mean, I'd say 2 months, you know,
Okay,
but yeah, that was kind of what I envisioned coming to this meeting.
To your point, I think 6 months is fair.
yeah,
To get a contractor, get stairs down.
Well, this would be to remove what you have that's not in compliance.
Well, here's an issue with a couple months, just to throw out of our experience of what the DNRs do. There's people who can't even get a building permit approved in a couple months based on their own shortages, number one, and that's their fault, not your fault. Number two, getting DNR approval, presumably they're gonna have to get approval to be in the public trust. Who knows how long that's taken? We've heard various stories. So to answer your overall question, despite whatever timing, it makes sense. It might be pragmatic, but that's yours. So you could also make the decision of you have 10 days to tear it down, or we're going to do it. And there's enforcement mechanisms in the state code. So all those decisions are yours. It is an option to answer you directly.
Secondly, that I know of, there's only 2 contractors installing the stairs over 2 walls in Long Beach.
They call it best and most.
I mean, I know summer's coming and everything, but I think
Yeah,
6 months is more reasonable
yeah, you're probably.
personally.
We haven't put out a bulletin to the homeowners yet about the FEMA requirement. Maybe that should be the first step if we haven't taken that one.
We mentioned it when they were here. But I think before we do that, I'd like Chris to clarify for all of us, yourself, that ordinance does apply from FEMA, and we have the potential of losing that insurance. That's.
And that very well, by the word of the ordinance, which again is mandated federally, right, and trickled down through the state, that it may be that you have to come in compliance, and then you have a battle with residents, right, and that's a different discussion. Some of those say we don't care, but that's, yeah, that puts the building commission and the council in an enforcement, right?
But let me, I know you're going to say some that they don't care, but if I'm reading it correctly, it doesn't matter what they care. I'm talking about from the town point of view, that nothing, something isn't abided by. That's true of everything. Yeah, well, drafted notice, so there's no individual decision here. Yeah, it's a collective decision. Nobody can. Yeah, we're being forced into it now.
Okay, let's just look at an example here. 2024. There it is. Okay, it's not parallel. It's not, I don't know how it's attached to the seawall. It's not more than 42 inches or whatever. This is not legal. It's wood. Simple, right?
You don't have to read the liquor laws in there, it shouldn't be there.
Right. That's, ultimately, I appreciate everybody, appreciates everybody's discussion today. And the reason I sent those pictures out, it's hard because now we're 3 years later, 4 years, basically 2019, 4 years later, and there's 60, 70 feet of beach out in front of some of these homes. So it's hard to go down there and say to a homeowner, hey, this is 2024. You know, your stairs here, they may have been there, maybe they were buried by sand. But the problem is, what you guys saw in those pictures, that's what happened, that's what we're fighting. And if we get a storm like that in the summertime, those storms happen in the middle of winter, or in the end of fall and into winter. So if that storm were to happen in the spring or early summer, and all that stuff gets washed down the beach, then it's an enforcement, whether it's Long Beach's ordinance, FEMA's ordinance. You've got stuff that doesn't comply to anything. It doesn't comply to the Long Beach ordinance because it's made out of wood. It didn't comply to the FEMA ordinance because it's below the 587. Whether it's the National Ordinary Watermark, I prefer to stay completely away from that. So it makes it pretty simple, I think. If you're built out of wood, and again, when we look at this as non-grandfathered, if you're built out of wood, you're right. If you didn't get a permit, you should be out anyway. But if it's no permit, it's built out of wood. So I think if we could make that determination here, and then I will tell you that I'll get with Chris. I'll try to get a hold of the FEMA people in the next couple of days and see what they have to say about it.
And I think the benefit of that is, going to Ken's point, is educating. I guess going to Pete's point too. There were public hearings. There was process followed between the plan commission and the town council and publication in the newspaper regarding this. That doesn't mean everybody pays attention, but I think that if we can get something in writing from the state DNR section that's tasked with enforcement and making sure all the municipalities are compliant with the FEMA regulations so that you can have flood insurance. If we have some feedback from them, that'll lend support to what we're doing. Now, listen, it isn't just us picking on you. This is a real thing. And in addition to this ordinance, what it says, here's some feedback from the state that supports that. We're not making it up and we're not picking on you, but it's important. And then you have this much time, or we have no choice but to enforce this. In addition to all the things that may be wrong of non-compliant, right? You didn't get a permit in the first place. And that's a side one. And on a lot of levels, I believe that enforcement will be easier because FEMA dictates that, right? There's a lot of people at risk for not being able to get insurance for their homes if you don't strictly comply with the FEMA requirements.
Chris, exactly to that point, do we feel that a well-drafted notice with the new requirements or requirements and the ramifications if they're not in compliance, set out, kind of pave the way for what we're doing, get the beehive stirred up a little bit, so to speak?
I think that's what we should do. We should, and I'm gonna list, I'll list as many. I got 5 written right here. I think what we should do, and I'm not trying to stifle anybody's opinions or discussion or whatever, but in my opinion only, is I think what we should do is we should say, okay, we're going to send a letter out to everybody that's affected by this. And we can, if we want to, we can send it to everybody in the whole town. I don't care.
How about everybody north of Lakeshore Drive?
Everybody north of Lakeshore Drive, and say, these are the current regulations of number 1, FEMA and the floodplain. Number 2, Long Beach town ordinances. Do we have a 3, 4, or 5? Anybody want to add on that? I mean, the problem with the DNR is, and I'm not picking them, but they run away from everything.
They're not going to help you.
And yes,
They're not going to help you with that part of it, which puts you in the gray. FEMA is the overriding, right? In addition to the normal concerns of town codes, et cetera, this is a real concern and a focus, and you need to be cognizant of this. Going to Ken's point, pointing that out, we can send a copy of it even, and put it on the website. I mean, you've done all those things. It's an issue of educating the public if that's your tact. It's
not us, it's we want, that's my point.
and it is. I mean, it truly is.
And do we want to include this inventory on there? You know, send, so that somebody, Mr. Lustuzo knows, hey, this is for you. He'll look at this and say, oh, yeah.
No,
Everybody wants that, each short drive.
well, and I think that we could point out to everybody again, most of them are not compliant. I don't know. We originally sent out to all of these people notice of the first meeting that you had on the subject matter. So you can direct it to all of those people specifically, but including everybody, it got everybody's attention on just sending them notice of the meeting.
And when our first meeting that we had in this room, I don't know if it was full, but it was close to full. And that was because we sent notices to everybody that this is going to be discussed at the meeting. At the time, we weren't prepared to do what we've done now. After that meeting, we did what we said we would. Lou and Bob went down and took pictures. We came up with an inventory. I spoke personally to at least half the people on the list. Some were removed because they complied. Some were added because of non-compliance. So I think if we do that, if we want a list, we'll compose a letter. I'll send it to everybody before I send it out to see if it's okay with everybody. And we'll say, dear homeowner, blah, blah, blah. These are the requirements of FEMA. These are the requirements of the town of Long Beach. And these are the FEMA requirements. I think we should include either a link so that they can go right to it, so it's not so voluminous, and send it out.
And I think you can go a little bit further of saying it is part of the process that was begun, for instance, October of 2022, it's, been determined. I think it's very important with the developments with FEMA and the adoption as required of the ordinance, that everybody be made specifically aware of the requirements, give them a copy of that code. So I think we're saying the same thing, but you can tie in, and why you're doing it is it's come up and determined that it really is going to override a lot of the determination with regard to these stairs anyway.
So FEMA rules have changed. Our own ordinances have not changed, but we need to comply to FEMA ordinance. And anybody in violation, here are the codes that we are looking at enforcing. And,
Okay, so, but should we not?
I think that, information that we provided about the beach, definitions, I think, so that would be helpful.
what is that? I mean, I know it was them, I'm not following them.
That,
It's sort of different, completely different towns. It's not from us.
I said, what you
like all the beach terms, show what,
Oh, yeah.
oh, Army Force.
No, that's stuff from the University of Wisconsin, Madison.
Doesn't matter. Department. Should the department should actually.
Okay, don't.
We could send a link to that. It's pretty okay.
Which one? This concern will energy. You're silenced. It's very good to take.
Who do we go after by getting that?
getting a what?
This the Army Corps, this is just information from the Army.
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah.
We could include there's two things I think that we want to make sure that people understand. One is, the two things that are enforcement are Honolulu beach ordinances and the FEMA regulations. Those are enforcement. I think we can include links to any other information that explain beach terms and what have you. But we have to make sure that everybody understands that we are doing this because we started, as Chris said, the process 2 years or a year and a half ago. And now the rules have changed for FEMA. The town of Long Beach has X rules that we have, and everyone must conform to these rules. Please familiarize yourself or whatever with this information. And then what's the next step?
That's the question. We don't need there, because we're gonna send this letter out,
Right.
and we're gonna give it some time to sink in.
Can I ask?
But we haven't really addressed it to any of these specific individuals who are gonna likely say, well, that can't be me.
Could we, just what you're saying about, could we, for these people, whatever we send out is wonderful, but for these people, we're asking for a reply. And if we don't get a reply, we do something, we contact them or something, to wake them up and make sure that they're listening to what we're telling them. I don't know, I'm looking for a way to know, like you said, what's next? If we'd like to know,
If we send a letter to them, how many? We're starting. Good. Everybody, we should address the letter to these people. They're the ones we think are.
if these are the ones, we can send a letter to everybody, again, these are the ones that we can pick up a letter, and we're asking for a reply to know that they looked at it and we're going to discuss something, so we protect them and we know they're going
And there are clearly ones here that are, no matter how you call it, they are in violation. The 2024 years, there's, we do this with 3 options. And but putting a general letter out there, it's just gonna cause all kinds of misunderstanding.
Also,
Because every communication we put out, when like we started sewage, the first wave was somebody started a rumor and now the whole town was going to be sewered. They addressed that for hours. It's just that big because people don't read. We should address it to the people who are meeting that are involved. That's very good. Listen, now, what do we say? Is it by this kind of feeling?
It's in violation of everything that we do.
Yeah, this is how. That's 1950.
Okay, so if we send.
But it's just not that simple. So I think that's where you're getting back to, we've spun this ball many times. It's no question it's in violation of FEMA. It is a question to me as I look at the picture. Is it in violation of the town code?
Yes.
Absolutely.
What if it's been there for 10 years? Is it?
Permit.
Pardon?
No permit. I mean, look at the wood,
And how long has it been known and were they cited and was it allowed? And is it over 2 years since that known violation? Those are all considerations. FEMA is the easy answer here because that's overriding. I'm just telling you, there's not a blanket just because I have a picture of that stairs. Now those look newer and they look like it. So I'm playing devil's advocate with you, but that's what's going to happen with all of these. And that's where you have to decide what your decisions, make a decision and go. Doesn't matter to me if you say, hey, we're going to send the contractor in, and if you don't, in 10 days, we've sent that letter out before and gotten people's attention. There's a statutory scheme that says, if you don't correct it, we will. You can decide to be, I'm not saying don't, I'm just telling you there's ramifications and you better be right on those, or you take the tax. So you decide how you do
Right here, we've got to be in agreement with what's right and what's wrong.
it. I agree with that.
So, and there are probably more than 50% of these here are just like that. And they didn't have a permit. Did some of them exist beforehand? Perhaps. That's what we found. But to me, the overriding thing that's driving this is the FEMA. If you have one thing that says don't move it, and whether it's us or them, you don't move it. And we're making it too difficult.
Well, one of the things that's significant to me here is we can take the weight of this,
Hey, turn on your microphones, guys.
one of the things that's clear to me here is we can take the weight of this nasty task off our shoulders by saying that FEMA has changed their rules, and here's what they are, and here's what we can allow, what we can't allow.
Yeah, that's true. But all we have to do is say, ooh, this one, right here, is no good.
I agree with you, Lou, and that's the point of the letter, because the people could see the law or FEMA in front of them. They could look at their property and say, oh, this might pertain to me, before we come down heavy-handed to remove the stairs or start issuing plans of that. So I think we did agree to send in the letter out, a notification. And for all practical purposes of the ordinance, the stairs are in violation.
Okay, so I'm gonna make a motion that we send a letter only to the people who think are in violation. Give me a second.
I'll second that.
Any discussion on that? Being done, John?
On what?
You
I have no further discussion, no.
Okay, did you hear the motion, right?
No, I did not. Some of you guys should have your microphones on. I can barely hear you.
The motion was to send the letter of potential
Yeah, I'm
violation
all for that.
only to the people who we think are in violation.
It was made by Pete, seconded by Bob. You in favor of that, John?
Yeah, I'll vote for that.
Pete?
Yep.
Larry, yes. Bob?
Yes.
Ken? Yep. Joe?
Yes.
Joe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I say something now?
Yeah.
I think what we did agree to is the people that we think are in violation are everybody on this list. Yeah, that's,
And then Chris, can you check on this grandfathering before Larry sends his letter out? Then you guys get together and do the letter. And then we need to decide on the next step. So we sent this letter out saying, okay, looks to me like you're in violation. That's why you got the letter. All right, so when do we meet again and what are we thinking we're gonna do?
Okay, I think it's absolutely necessary that everybody go through the pictures that were sent. If you don't have the pictures, I'll send them again. But they were high resolution, whatever. That each one is clearly addressed and corresponds to the sheet. And make a determination amongst yourselves so you're familiar with it. What do you agree with? What do you not agree with? Based on our discussions.
Peter.
Yeah.
I apologize, but I probably run on a peak and everything else. Is there any way that we can get somebody to make us a packet? Because there's about 26 of them, which I'd love to have, but instead of trying to print them all on my printer, I might be there for weeks. Is that possible?
We can just pull them up.
You can do that.
You can share your computer with me.
Is that a color printer?
So,
All right, if
Somebody's on those man.
if I ask you,
okay.
we do
Does everybody want a hard copy or is?
I do that.
Raise your hand if you need a hard copy.
the only one.
Okay, so if Pete will send out the pictures again
Okay,
and you'll be on there. And when you get them, would you make a copy for Joe?
yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, Joe, I'm sorry, I didn't see your name.
Okay. So for clarity's sake, now it's really clear as mud. So you voted to send a letter to them.
Yes.
And then you're gonna look at pictures to see what we agree with, if that's in violation or not. Or what enforcement, so not sure what you do.
want people to make a decision and be knowledgeable about what these situations are in relation to documents and the things that are out there. So if we can't do that, we just have these discussions and we just keep going round and round. You have to look at the evidence and make a decision.
I agree with you, but what do we vote to send what are you sending, what's the substance of the letter? You're in violation, but we're not yet prepared to tell you how and why, other than when a FEMA applies and these other things may or may not. Because what you're saying, Pete, is reasonable. I understand what you're saying.
And the contents of the letter should not accuse. It should go to those people who we think we have a question. We don't have to say they're in violation. We don't have to say they shouldn't do things up. We just say, if FEMA's thing is this, here's the situation. We're going to be addressing these issues shortly on an individual basis.
It would be something like, in our review, we noticed, blah, 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 and there's potential violations that you might have, and we'll contact some.
I'll write the letter and I'll send it to everybody beforehand. Basically, the letter is gonna say, here are the regulations that the building commission is tasked with enforcing. Please review them. We are, whatever, I'm not writing it out, I don't know shorthand, so I'll come up with something, send it to you guys, you can make your comments on it, and then we'll send it out. In the meantime, before that, Chris and I will make sure we understand what FEMA is or is not going to do for us. Say
To Pete's point of limitation of distribution to those people on our list here, is there a specific reason, Pete, to limit that? You don't want to get the other people not involved flustered, so to speak?
Yeah, that's what I said.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean,
but on the other hand, just hear me out here. On the other hand, wouldn't it be beneficial for us to alert all the residents north of Lakeshore Drive for future reference?
They're gonna have to come to us for a permit.
You know, maybe we could send a letter to these people and we could post on the website the letter also. And so everybody has access to it.
Yeah.
That sounds reasonable. Sure. It stays posted and it doesn't, you know, but the concern I have is about just saying it, these people is, there may be stairs that have been built since Lou and I took our walk on the beach. And so then some of these people may be, other people not on this list may be contemplating.
Yeah.
So we'll be sure to notify them in some way.
Yeah. The only comment let's bite some of it off. I mean, we can't solve the whole world. We've got a group that we've been looking at, we've been talking about. There are others might be there. Let's look at these and then build from there. Let's get something done, accomplished. I think that's important and try to do in the whole world first. That's my opinion.
Okay. Anything else?
So when are we gonna meet again and what do we anticipate?
When do we want to meet again? I won't be here for the March meeting.
Yeah, I think I'll be gone too. We'll probably have to schedule a
It
special.
was a postponed meeting. March 10th, I'll be going, Bob will be going, Chris will be gone. Chris is gonna be gone.
he'll be going.
I'm not telling you. I'm going to 2014 when those stairs are. Bring it slow.
Is that for the whole month, Derek, or just part of the?
I'll be back at the end. I mean, I'm sorry. I leave Sunday and I'll be back on the 14th.
I leave the first and I'm gone for like 2.5 weeks.
Yeah, same.
You too? Okay. So how about for
Few days early.
end of March?
Whatever, if we need. Most people have to think about it.
How about a Friday at the end of March?
Either back on 17th,
24th, 31st.
20th.
Is that-
24th sounds okay. Is that okay?
That's not Easter.
Okay with me.
Okay, so
September 17th, Chris is back.
You'll be back, Chris? So.
St.
this
Patrick's
meeting,
Day.
We'll have a regular village meeting and do ordinance.
Just have to participate and
Pack us up.
just make sure nothing's on the agenda this time.
All right.
Be considered,
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and move it then to the 24th of March. I'll put it on Zoom and get it out to everybody. That sound all right?
What time?
Say 24th, sure.
1 o'clock?
24th, 1 PM?
Right.
Yeah.
That's weird.
All right.
That's pretty quick.
Organization. Okay, anything else?
Motion to adjourn.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.